A billionaire was still a virgin at 40, until a lonely poor woman asked to stay in his house during a stormy night. For years, he had everything money could buy, except love, except trust, except a family of his own. But when a desperate mother and her child stepped through his gates, his cold mansion began to feel alive for the very first time. What starts as an act of mercy quickly unravels into something deeper because she carries scars from a dangerous past, and he holds secrets that money could never hide. As fear collides with hope, and passion collides with danger, the question becomes unavoidable. Can two broken souls build a life together before the shadows of the past tear them apart forever? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The first rays of dawn crept through the towering windows of Harrington Manor, casting long shadows across polished marble floors. Michael Harrington opened his eyes precisely at 6 o'clock in the morning, just as he had done every day for the past 15 years. The king-sized bed, with its Egyptian cotton sheets and hand-stitched quilts, felt as empty as ever. He swung his feet onto the plush carpet, his movements mechanical, rehearsed. The silence in the mansion was deafening, a reminder of his solitary existence. His footsteps echoed through the corridor as he made his way downstairs, his designer sleepwear immaculate despite a night of restless sleep. The kitchen staff had already prepared his morning coffee, leaving it in a sterling silver carafe on the marble counter. They knew better than to be present when he emerged. Mr. Harrington preferred minimal interaction, especially in the early hours. "Another day," he muttered, pouring the steaming liquid into a bone china cup. The rich aroma filled his nostrils, but even this small pleasure felt hollow somehow. His tablet waited on the counter, loaded with the morning's financial reports. Numbers scrolled across the screen: stock prices, market trends, quarterly projections. At 40 years old, Michael had mastered the language of wealth, but the satisfaction of watching his billions grow had long since faded. The dining room could seat 20 people comfortably. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead, their sparkle mocking the solitude below. A single place setting waited at the head of the massive mahogany table. Fine china, polished silver, and pristine linens arranged with military precision. His breakfast arrived silently: 2 perfectly poached eggs, whole grain toast, and fresh fruit. The staff had mastered the art of invisible service, appearing and disappearing like ghosts in his carefully ordered world. Michael ate methodically, his eyes often drifting to the empty chairs surrounding him. The media had dubbed him the Virgin Billionaire years ago, a label that stung despite its truth. He'd never confirmed it, but his complete absence from the dating scene had only fueled the speculation. As evening approached, dark clouds gathered over the hills surrounding the estate. Michael stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his study, watching nature's display with detached interest. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the manicured grounds in brief, brilliant flashes. The storm intensified, rain lashing against the windows with growing fury. Thunder rolled across the valley, making the glass panes vibrate. It was during one such thunderclap that an unfamiliar sound caught his attention: the front gate intercom buzzing. Frowning, Michael moved to the security panel near his desk. No one ever came to the gate unannounced. He pressed the button, and the outdoor camera feed flickered to life on the monitor. His breath caught in his throat. A woman stood there, her dark hair plastered to her face by the rain. She clutched a small boy to her chest, trying to shield him from the downpour with her own body. Both were completely drenched, their clothes clinging to them like second skins. "Please," her voice crackled through the speaker, trembling with cold and desperation. "Please, we need help. Our car broke down on the road, and we've been walking for miles. We just need shelter until the storm passes." Michael's finger hovered over the intercom button. Years of careful isolation warred with basic human decency. The woman hugged the boy tighter as another lightning bolt illuminated the sky, making him flinch against her. His normally rigid routine screamed at him to ignore them, to maintain the sanctuary of his solitude. But something in the woman's eyes, visible even through the grainy security feed, spoke to a part of him he thought he'd locked away long ago. Thunder crashed overhead, and the little boy began to cry. The sound carried through the intercom, piercing Michael's carefully constructed walls of isolation. His finger pressed the button before he could second-guess himself. "I'm opening the gate," he heard himself say, his voice rougher than usual. "Follow the drive up to the main entrance. I'll meet you there." Michael's hand trembled slightly as he pressed the gate release button. Through the security monitors, he watched the bedraggled pair make their way up the winding driveway, the woman holding the boy close as they battled against the wind and rain. At the massive front door, Michael hesitated, his hand on the polished brass handle. It had been years since anyone other than staff had entered his sanctuary. With a deep breath, he pulled it open. The woman and child stood huddled on his doorstep, water pooling around their feet on the marble portico. Up close, he could see they were both shivering violently. "Thank you," the woman said through chattering teeth. "I'm Sarah Lopez, and this is my son Danny." "Michael Harrington," he replied stiffly, stepping back to let them in. "Wait here, please." He returned moments later with an armful of fluffy white towels, holding them out awkwardly. His staff usually handled situations requiring hospitality. Sarah accepted them gratefully, immediately wrapping one around Danny before seeing to herself. "The dining room is this way," Michael said, more to break the uncomfortable silence than anything else. "I'll have the kitchen prepare something hot." A quick call to his housekeeper set things in motion, and soon they were seated at opposite ends of the long mahogany table. Michael had taken his usual place at the head, while Sarah and Danny sat far down near the other end, looking small and lost in the grand space. Steam rose from bowls of homemade soup as they ate in silence. Michael sipped his wine, stealing glances at his unexpected guests. The boy, Danny, seemed to have recovered his spirits now that he was warm and dry, looking around the ornate room with undisguised curiosity. Suddenly, Danny slid down from his chair. Before Sarah could stop him, he walked down the length of the table toward Michael, his small feet patting softly on the Persian carpet. "Are you my daddy?" Danny asked, his innocent voice clear in the quiet room. Michael choked on his wine, the rich red liquid splattering onto his pristine white shirt. He coughed violently, face turning red as he struggled to catch his breath. Sarah's nervous laughter rang out as she hurried to collect her son. "Oh, honey, no, I'm so sorry," she said, addressing both Danny and Michael. Danny's father. He left when Danny was just a baby. Sometimes he asks men he meets if they're his dad. Michael dabbed at his shirt with a napkin, still coughing slightly. "It's fine," he managed, though his heart was racing from more than just the wine going down wrong. Danny looked between the two adults, confusion clear on his young face. "But he has a big house like Daddy's supposed to have in the stories," he protested. Sarah smoothed her son's hair, her eyes meeting Michael's with embarrassment. "Having a big house doesn't make someone a daddy, sweetheart. Come on, let's finish our soup before it gets cold." The remainder of the meal passed in awkward silence. Michael found himself watching them when he thought they wouldn't notice. The gentle way Sarah wiped soup from Danny's chin, the child's uninhibited giggles when he accidentally dropped his spoon. When dinner was finished, Michael cleared his throat. "You'll need somewhere to sleep tonight. The storm's only getting worse." He stood, gesturing for them to follow. "There's a guest wing on the second floor." Leading them up the grand staircase, Michael felt strangely self-conscious of his home's opulence. The crystal chandeliers, the gilt-framed paintings, the marble statues, all seemed excessive under Sarah's tired but observant gaze. "This suite should be suitable," he said, opening a door to reveal a comfortable sitting room with adjoining bedrooms. "There are fresh toiletries in the bathrooms, and I'll have some clean clothes brought up." "Thank you, Mr. Harrington," Sarah said softly. "You've been very kind." Danny yawned widely, rubbing his eyes with small fists. "Good night," he mumbled, surprising Michael by wrapping his arms around the billionaire's legs in a quick hug before Sarah could stop him. Michael stood frozen, unable to remember the last time anyone had hugged him. By the time he recovered, Sarah had ushered Danny into one of the bedrooms. "Good night," he managed to say, backing out of the suite and closing the door. In the hallway, Michael leaned against the wall, his heart thundering in his chest. The warmth of Danny's innocent embrace seemed to linger, along with the memory of Sarah's gentle laugh and kind eyes. For the first time in years, his mansion didn't feel quite so empty, and that thought terrified him more than he cared to admit. The next morning, Michael woke to unfamiliar sounds drifting through his normally silent mansion. Distant clattering and the unmistakable sizzle of cooking drew him from his bedroom, still in his silk pajamas and robe. As he descended the grand staircase, an enticing aroma of bacon wafted up to greet him. Following his nose to the kitchen, he stopped short in the doorway. Sarah stood at the professional-grade stove, spatula in hand, wearing borrowed clothes that were slightly too large for her frame. She had rolled up the sleeves of a white blouse, and her dark hair was pulled back in a casual ponytail. "Good morning, Mr. Harrington," she said brightly, noticing him hovering uncertainly. "I hope you don't mind. I wanted to thank you for your hospitality." Before Michael could respond, small footsteps thundered behind him. "Morning." Danny charged past, nearly colliding with Michael's legs. "Mom's making her special eggs. They're the best ever." "Danny," indoor voice, Sarah reminded gently, but she was smiling. Mr. Harrington might not be used to so much excitement this early. Michael cleared his throat. "I usually have coffee first," he admitted, moving toward the expensive coffee maker that dominated one counter. "Already made." Sarah gestured to a steaming pot. "Hope you don't mind. I figured out the machine after only 2 tries." The familiar scent of his preferred dark roast blend helped steady Michael as he poured himself a cup. He watched Sarah plate eggs, bacon, and toast with practiced ease, so different from the precise, restaurant-style presentations his chef usually prepared. "Do you want to see my room?" Danny asked suddenly, tugging at Michael's robe. "It's huge. And the bed bounces really good." "Really well," Sarah corrected automatically, setting plates on the kitchen island. "And no bed bouncing, young man." Michael found himself being pulled by his sleeve toward a chair. "Sit by me," Danny insisted. "Do you live here all alone? Where's your mom and dad? Do you have any toys?" "Danny, let Mr. Harrington eat his breakfast," Sarah intervened, but Michael surprised himself by answering. "My parents aren't around anymore," he said carefully. "And no, I don't have any toys. This is mainly my office and home." "No toys?" Danny looked horrified. "But you're rich. You could buy all the toys." Sarah shot Michael an apologetic look, but he felt the corner of his mouth twitch. "I suppose I could," he agreed. "But who would play with them?" "I would," Danny declared immediately. "Can I see the rest of your house, please?" After breakfast, Michael found himself leading an impromptu tour, with Danny racing ahead and Sarah following at a more sedate pace. The boys' endless questions echoed off marble floors and wood-paneled walls. "What's in there? Why is that picture so big? Can I touch this? Is that real gold? Why do you need so many bathrooms?" Each question seemed to chip away at the formal facade Michael had maintained for so long. He found himself explaining things he'd never thought about: why the chandelier sparkled in different colors, how the security system worked, which rooms he actually used versus those that stayed empty. At lunch, served in the sunny conservatory rather than the formal dining room, Sarah watched Michael trying to answer Danny's latest barrage of questions about his business. "You're not used to casual conversation, are you?" she observed gently, a hint of teasing in her voice. Michael stiffened slightly. "I interact with people professionally," he said carefully. "But not personally?" Sarah's eyes were kind, not judgmental. "It's okay, you know. Some people find it harder than others." Maybe it was the warmth in her voice, or the way sunlight filtered through the glass ceiling, making everything seem softer, more approachable. Whatever the reason, Michael found himself speaking. "The media calls me the virgin billionaire," he said quietly, while Danny was distracted by watching birds outside. "They think it's a joke or an act, but..." He trailed off, unable to meet Sarah's eyes. "But it's true," she finished softly. Lack of mockery in her voice made him look up, instead of the judgment or pity he expected. He saw understanding in her expression. "I've never," he gestured vaguely. "There was never time, or the right person, or—" And then it became this thing, this wall between me and everyone else. The longer it went on, the harder it became to change. Sarah reached across the table, almost touching his hand before pulling back. "Thank you for trusting me with that," she said simply. "Everyone has their own path, Michael. There's no shame in yours." That night, lying in his king-sized bed, Michael listened to the sounds of life echoing through his usually silent home. Danny's bright laugh carried faintly down the hallway, followed by Sarah's warm voice reading a bedtime story. The unfamiliar noises should have bothered him, had always bothered him, when his rare house guests disrupted his routine. Instead, he found himself straining to hear more. The soft murmur of voices, the distant creak of floorboards, even the muffled thump of what was probably Danny ignoring his mother's no jumping on the bed rule, all of it felt strangely soothing, like music he'd forgotten he knew how to hear. He rolled onto his side, aware of the vast empty space in his bed, in his home, in his life. The carefully constructed solitude that had always felt like safety now seemed more like a prison of his own making. Somewhere down the hall, Danny laughed again, and Michael felt an unfamiliar ache in his chest. Over the next 2 days, the mansion began to breathe with new life. Sarah couldn't help herself, wherever she went. Her hands found work to do. She started small, just dusting a forgotten corner table in the east wing. The rich mahogany gleamed after her attention, and something in her chest warmed at the sight. "Your house has such beautiful bones," she told Michael over coffee that morning, "but it needs a woman's touch." Michael watched, fascinated, as she moved through his home like a gentle whirlwind. The library, with its towering shelves, received her special attention. She hummed while organizing books that had sat askew for years, her fingers trailing lovingly over leather spines. "These deserve to be read," she said, opening curtains to let sunlight stream across the reading nooks, not just displayed like museum pieces. In the formal sitting room, she discovered crystal vases gathering dust. Soon they sparkled, filled with fresh flowers from the garden. The blooms brought color to rooms that had known only muted tones for decades. "Look, Mr. Michael," Danny called from the courtyard. "I found a ball." Michael glanced up from his laptop to see the boy bouncing an old tennis ball against the stone wall. Something tugged at his memory. Hadn't he played with that same ball years ago? "Would you like to play catch?" The words left his mouth before he could stop them. Danny's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Really? You want to play with me?" Setting aside his work, something he never did during business hours, Michael stepped into the warm afternoon Sunday. His suit jacket felt stiff and formal for such an activity, so he removed it, rolling up his sleeves. "I haven't done this in quite some time," he admitted, catching the ball Danny tossed his way. "You'll have to be patient with me." But muscle memory took over, and soon they fell into an easy rhythm. The soft thump of the ball passing between them, mixed with Danny's delighted giggles. From an upstairs window, Sarah watched them, her heart swelling at the sight of her usually energetic son focusing so intently on being gentle with Michael's hesitant throws. The mansion seemed to shed its coldness like an old skin. Rooms that had echoed with emptiness now held the warmth of conversation. The kitchen filled with the aromas of Sarah's cooking simple meals that somehow tasted better than anything his chef had ever prepared. "It's because they're made with love," Danny explained seriously. When Michael mentioned this, "Mom says that's the secret ingredient." Even the staff moved differently, responding to the change in atmosphere. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, who had maintained a professional distance for 15 years, actually smiled when she found Sarah teaching Danny to fold napkins into swans. "Perhaps young sir would like to learn some other shapes," she offered, pulling up a chair. By the second evening, Michael realized he hadn't eaten alone once since their arrival. The massive dining table, usually a reminder of his solitude, now felt right with Sarah and Danny at either side of him. Danny's chatter filled the spaces between bites, while Sarah gently drew Michael into conversations about more than just business. "Did you always want to be a businessman?" she asked, passing him the salt. Without being asked, when had she noticed that habit of his? He paused, realizing no one had ever asked him that. I wanted to be an astronaut, actually, when I was very young. Space. Danny's eyes went wide. That's so cool. Can we look at the stars tonight? And somehow, Michael found himself setting up the telescope he'd bought years ago but never used, teaching Danny about constellations while Sarah wrapped them all in warm blankets against the evening chill. The sharp knock came during dinner on the second night, cutting through their comfortable routine like a knife. Danny jumped, his fork clattering against his plate. Sarah's face went pale, her hand automatically reaching for her son. Michael rose, straightening his tie. He still wore one at dinner, though he'd relaxed enough to remove his jacket. I'll see who it is. The heavy door swung open to reveal a courier in a crisp uniform. Delivery for Sarah Lopez, he announced, holding out an envelope. Michael's pulse quickened. No one knew Sarah was here. He took the letter himself, signing the delivery confirmation with steady hands that belied his growing unease. Back in the dining room, Sarah's fingers trembled as she opened the envelope. A single sheet of paper fell out, covered in angry block letters. As she read, all the color drained from her face. Mama, Danny's voice quavered. What's wrong? May I? Michael held out his hand for the letter. Sarah passed it over wordlessly, pulling Danny close to her side. The words burned across the page. I know where you are. You can't hide what's mine forever. I'm coming for what belongs to me, both of you. Your loving husband, Jack. Michael's fingers tightened on the paper, crinkling its edges. The sanctuary of his home, which had just begun to feel truly alive, suddenly seemed fragile as spun glass. He looked at Sarah, seeing the fear she tried to hide from Danny, and felt something fierce and protective rise in his chest. He found us, Sarah whispered, her arms tightening around Danny. He always finds us. Michael's hands trembled as he held the crumpled letter, his jaw clenched tight. The dining room, which had slowly begun to feel warmer over the past few days, now seemed to freeze over with tension. Sarah sat at the table, her face pale, while Danny played with his food, unaware of the storm brewing. Sarah, Michael said, his voice low and controlled. We need to talk, now. He gestured toward his study, away from Danny's innocent ears. Sarah nodded slowly, placing her napkin beside her plate. Danny, sweetie, finish your dinner. Mommy needs to talk to Mr. Harrington for a minute. Inside the wood-paneled study, Michael closed the heavy door and turned to face Sarah. The letter shook in his grip as he held it up. What is this? Who exactly are you running from? Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, her shoulders hunched. Tears welled in her eyes, but she lifted her chin, meeting his gaze. His name is Marcus, my ex-husband. Her voice cracked. I should have told you everything from the start, but I was scared you wouldn't let us stay. Tell me now, Michael demanded, though his tone softened at the sight of her distress. Sarah sank into one of the leather chairs, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I met Marcus when I was young and stupid. He seemed charming at first, but after we married. She drew in a shaky breath. The abuse started slowly. A push here, a slap there, always with apologies and promises to change. Michael's chest tightened as he watched tears roll down her cheeks. He handed her his handkerchief, a simple white square with his initials embroidered in the corner. Thank you, she whispered, dabbing at her eyes. When I got pregnant with Danny, I thought things would get better. Instead, they got worse. Marcus has connections with some dangerous people. I'd hear conversations late at night about things that made my skin crawl. Drugs, weapons, threats. Michael leaned against his desk, his mind racing. His peaceful sanctuary had become entangled in something dark and dangerous. Part of him wanted to ask them to leave, to return to his safe, predictable isolation. But when he thought of Danny's innocent smile, and Sarah's gentle presence that had begun to warm his cold mansion, his heart ached. The final straw came when Danny was 5. Sarah continued, her voice stronger now. Marcus came home drunk, angry about some deal gone wrong. He grabbed Danny by the arm so hard it left bruises. Her eyes flashed with maternal fury. No one touches my son. That night, I packed what I could carry. took the money I'd been secretly saving, and we ran. How long have you been running? Michael asked quietly. 6 months. Sarah twisted the handkerchief in her hands. We've stayed in shelters, cheap motels, friends' couches, but he always finds us. He has friends everywhere, people who owe him favors. That's why we were out in the storm that night. We had to leave our last hiding place in a hurry. Michael pushed away from the desk and began pacing, his footsteps heavy on the hardwood floor. His life had been carefully constructed to avoid exactly this kind of chaos. No attachments meant no complications, no risk, no pain. But now, a soft knock at the study door interrupted his thoughts. Danny poked his head in, holding a broken toy car. "Mr. Michael, can you help me fix it?" The wheel fell off. Michael stared at the little boy, his innocent face full of trust. In that moment, images flashed through his mind. Danny running through the halls, his laughter echoing off the walls. Sarah's warm smile as she arranged flowers in the library. The way his house had started to feel like a home for the first time in decades. "Come here, buddy," Michael said softly, kneeling down to examine the toy car. Sarah watched, her breath held, as Michael carefully snapped the wheel back into place. Danny's face lit up with joy. "Thank you." Danny threw his arms around Michael's neck in a quick hug before running back out to play. Michael stood slowly, his decision crystallizing. He turned to Sarah, his expression resolute. "You're not running anymore. Both of you will stay here, where I can protect you." Sarah's eyes widened. "Michael, no. Marcus is dangerous. I can't let you risk." "I have resources," Michael interrupted. "Security systems, lawyers, connections of my own. Let him try to come here." His voice hardened with determination. "This is your home now. Both of you." Fresh tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks, but these were different. Tears of relief, of gratitude. She stood and reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "Thank you," she whispered. Later that night, Michael and Sarah sat in the grand living room, the crackling fireplace casting dancing shadows on the walls. No words passed between them, but the silence felt comfortable, shared. Danny had fallen asleep on the couch between them, his repaired toy car clutched in his small hand. Michael watched the flames, feeling something shift inside him. For the first time in years, his wealth meant more than just numbers in a bank account. It meant he could protect this small family that had somehow slipped past his defenses. As the clock struck 10 o'clock, Michael stood. "I'll do my rounds," he said quietly, not wanting to wake Danny. Sarah nodded, understanding in her eyes as she gathered her sleeping son in her arms. Michael walked through his mansion, checking every lock personally. He tested the front door, then the back, making sure the security system was armed. At each window, he pulled the curtains tight, scanning the darkness beyond. For the first time since he'd inherited this house, he wasn't just going through motions, he was standing guard. At the final door, Michael's hand lingered on the lock. The sound of the bolt sliding into place echoed through the quiet hallway, a sound of commitment, of protection, of change. The mansion's atmosphere shifted subtly with each passing day, like winter melting into spring. Michael found himself making phone calls he never thought he'd make, hiring additional staff members with military backgrounds. To anyone asking, he simply mentioned upgrading security protocols. But his watchful eyes told a different story. "We'll need 2 more at the south gate," he instructed his head of security, speaking in hushed tones in his study. "And make sure they're experienced. Background checks, triple verification." His fingers drummed against the polished desk, a new nervous habit he'd developed since that warning letter arrived. In the library, where afternoon sunlight streamed through tall windows, Michael discovered an unexpected joy in teaching Danny. The boy sat cross-legged on a plush leather chair, his small face scrunched in concentration as Michael explained the basics of chess. "So the knight moves in an L shape?" Danny asked, holding up the carved piece, examining it from all angles. "That's right," Michael replied, his usual stern expression softening. 2 squares forward and 1 to the side, or 1 square forward and 2 to the side. Danny's face lit up when he successfully moved the piece. "Like this?" "Exactly." Michael felt an unfamiliar warmth in his chest. You're catching on quickly. Their lessons expanded beyond chess. Michael found himself explaining simple mathematics, watching with growing pride as Danny grasped new concepts. The boy's enthusiasm was infectious, his questions endless but never annoying. During one of their afternoon sessions, Sarah stood in the doorway, watching silently. Michael looked up to find her eyes glistening with tears. "Is everything all right?" he asked, concern creasing his forehead. Sarah wiped her eyes quickly, smiling. "More than all right. I haven't seen him this happy in years. He's thriving here." She paused, her voice softening. "Thank you, Michael, for everything." The dining room, once a monument to solitude, transformed each evening into a warm gathering place. The long table that had seemed so imposing now felt just right as they sat together, sharing meals and stories. Danny's laughter echoed off the high ceilings, and even Michael found himself chuckling at the boy's animated tales about his day's adventures. And then, Danny exclaimed one evening, gesturing with his fork, "I found this huge butterfly in the garden. It was blue and black and everything." "A morpho butterfly," Michael offered, surprising himself with the knowledge. "They're quite rare in these parts." Sarah raised an eyebrow, impressed. "Is there anything you don't know about?" Michael felt his cheeks warm slightly. "Many things. Like how to properly respond to compliments, apparently." Their shared laughter filled the room, and Michael marveled at how natural it felt now. The silence that had once defined his existence seemed distant, like a half-forgotten dream. But peace, as Michael well knew, could be fragile. Late one night, as he made his final rounds of the property, a new habit he'd developed, something caught his eye. Through the ornate gates, a car sat idling on the street, its headlights off. The vehicle was ordinary enough to blend in, but Michael had spent years reading threats in the margins of life. He stood at his office window, watching. Minutes ticked by, and still, the car remained. His hand tightened on the curtain as a familiar tension crept up his spine. The seed of fear planted itself deep in his chest, taking root among his growing feelings for Sarah and Danny. He debated whether to tell Sarah about the car. Looking down the hallway toward her room, where a soft light still glowed under the door, he decided against it. She had finally started sleeping through the night, no longer jumping at every shadow. Danny was flourishing in their makeshift routine. Michael wouldn't disturb their hard-won peace, not yet. Instead, he made another call to his security team, his voice low but firm. "I want the cameras upgraded. Full perimeter coverage, night vision, everything. And I need it done yesterday." As he hung up, Michael caught his reflection in the window, the worried crease between his brows, the tightness around his mouth. The man staring back at him looked different from the isolated billionaire of just weeks ago. This man had something to lose, something to protect. The car eventually pulled away, leaving only questions in its wake. Michael stayed at the window longer than necessary, his thoughts churning like storm clouds. The mansion had become more than a shelter for Sarah and Danny. It had become a home. And Michael realized, with both clarity and concern, that he would do whatever it took to keep it that way. That night, sleep eluded him. He sat in his study, monitoring the security feeds, watching the empty street where the car had been. The chess set from his afternoon lesson with Danny still lay on the side table, pieces arranged mid-game. Looking at it, Michael felt the weight of responsibility settle more firmly on his shoulders. He wasn't just protecting two people who had sought refuge in his home. He was protecting the first real family he'd known in decades. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the mansion's marble floors as Michael adjusted his tie for the fifth time. His reflection in the hallway mirror showed a man both excited and terrified. He hadn't ventured into town for a casual outing in years, preferring the safety of his isolated routines. "Are we really going to town?" Danny's voice echoed through the corridor as he bounded down the stairs, his small feet creating a cheerful rhythm. "Can we get ice cream?" Michael's lips twitched into an almost smile. "We'll see." Sarah appeared behind Danny, wearing a simple blue dress that made her eyes sparkle. "Someone's excited," she said, ruffling her son's hair. "Thank you for doing this, Michael. We've been cooped up here for days." The drive into town felt different with company. Usually, Michael only left the mansion for business meetings, but today, the familiar road seemed brighter. Danny pressed his face against the window, pointing at every interesting sight, while Sarah hummed softly to the radio. The small diner, Lucy's Place, sat on the corner of Main Street, its red checkered curtains and chrome trim a throwback to simpler times. As they walked in, the bell above the door announced their arrival, and the usual morning chatter died down. Michael felt dozens of eyes turn toward them. "Did you see that? Is that Michael Harrington? With a woman and child?" The whispers weren't exactly subtle. Michael's shoulders tensed, but Sarah's gentle touch on his arm made him relax slightly. "Let's sit by the window," she suggested, leading them to a booth. Danny slid in first, followed by Sarah, while Michael took the seat across from them. Lucy herself, a woman who had owned the diner for 30 years, approached their table with 3 menus and wide eyes. "Mr. Harrington, what a surprise. We haven't seen you in here since my father's time," Michael finished politely. "These are my guests, Sarah and Danny Lopez." Sarah ordered chocolate chip pancakes with extra whipped cream, her eyes lighting up as she explained to Danny that these were her favorite when she was little. "My mom used to take me here every Sunday after church." Danny got Mickey Mouse pancakes with a face made of fruit, while Michael settled for plain toast and eggs. As they ate, he noticed how Sarah cut Danny's pancakes into perfect little squares, how she wiped syrup from his chin with a napkin, how she laughed when he made a whipped cream mustache. The locals continued to stare and whisper, but Sarah's presence made it easier to bear. She had a way of drawing his attention away from the uncomfortable moments, asking him questions about the town's history or sharing funny stories about Danny's adventures. After breakfast, they walked down Main Street to Johnson's department store. Danny needed new clothes. He'd grown out of most of his old ones. The store clerk's eyebrows shot up when Michael Harrington walked in, but Sarah quickly took charge, leading them to the children's section. "Try this one." Sarah held up a blue t-shirt with dinosaurs on it. Danny's face lit up. Michael found himself getting drawn into the shopping experience, suggesting a warm jacket that reminded him of one he'd had as a boy. When Danny tried it on and grinned, something warm bloomed in Michael's chest. "It's perfect," Sarah said, smoothing the collar. "But Michael, you don't have to. Please," he interrupted softly. "Let me do this." They left with 3 bags of clothes, Danny proudly wearing his new jacket despite the warm weather. Their next stop was the grocery store, where Sarah insisted on buying ingredients to cook dinner. "You've been so generous," she explained, selecting fresh vegetables with practiced ease. "At least let me contribute something." Michael watched as she and Danny worked together, the boy helping to pick out the ripest tomatoes and the freshest herbs. They moved through the aisles with an easy familiarity that made his heart ache. This is what family shopping looks like, he realized. The sun was setting as they drove back to the mansion, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. Danny had fallen asleep in the back seat, clutching a new stuffed dinosaur. Michael had secretly bought him when Sarah wasn't looking. "Thank you," Sarah said quietly. This meant so much to him, to both of us. Michael gripped the steering wheel tighter, fighting the unfamiliar emotions rising in his chest. I enjoyed it too. They carried the sleeping Danny to his room, Sarah tucking him in while Michael brought in the shopping bags. The day felt perfect, almost normal, something Michael had never thought possible for someone like him. But as he walked down the main hallway later that night, heading to his study, something caught his eye. An envelope had been slid under the front door, its white surface stark against the dark wood floor. Michael's hands trembled slightly as he picked it up. Inside was a single photograph. Sarah and Danny at the diner, taken through the window. Their faces were circled in red marker. The warmth of the day vanished, replaced by an icy fear that gripped his heart. He stood in the silent hallway, the photograph burning in his hands, knowing that their moment of normalcy had been watched by dangerous eyes. Michael's footsteps echoed through the mansion's corridors as he strode toward the security office, the photograph clenched in his hand. His normally composed face was tight with anger, jaw clenched as he burst through the door. "Roberts!" he bellowed, making his head of security jump from his desk. "How did this get under my door?" He slapped the photograph down on the desk. The security chief's face paled as he examined the image. "Sir, I don't understand. We've had the perimeter locked down. No one should have gotten close enough." "Well, someone did." Michael's voice was deadly quiet. "Someone got close enough to take this picture and deliver it right into my home. The home where I promised safety to a woman and her child." Robert scrambled to pull up the security footage, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "We'll review every camera, sir. I'll double the patrols and—" "Double isn't enough." Michael cut him off. "Triple them. Install more cameras. Whatever it costs. I want this place fortress tight by nightfall." Leaving Roberts to his task, Michael headed toward the kitchen where he could hear Sarah humming. The sound stopped abruptly when she saw his face. "What's wrong?" she asked, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Michael hesitated, but he couldn't hide this from her. Wordlessly, he handed her the photograph. Sarah's face drained of color as she stared at the image, her hands beginning to shake. "No," she whispered, the photograph fluttering to the counter. "No, no, no." Her legs gave out, and Michael caught her just before she collapsed, guiding her to a chair. "He found us." Sarah's voice broke as tears spilled down her cheeks. "Jack found us. He's going to take Danny. He's going to hurt us again." Michael knelt beside her chair, taking her trembling hands in his. "Sarah, look at me," he said firmly. "I won't let that happen. Do you understand? You're under my protection now." "You don't know Jack," she choked out. "He has connections, dangerous people who— and I have resources he can't imagine." Michael interrupted. "Money, security, influence. I promise you, Sarah, you and Danny are safe here." She looked into his eyes, searching for truth, and found steel there. This wasn't the awkward, isolated man they'd first met. This was someone who would move mountains to keep his word. Sarah took a shaky breath, squeezing his hands. I need to do something, to keep busy, to not think about." She stood suddenly, wiping her eyes. "I'm going to cook, a real feast. Will you help me?" Michael blinked, surprised by the request, but nodded. "Of course. Though I should warn you, I've never cooked anything in my life." A small smile crossed Sarah's face. "Then it's time you learned." For the next few hours, the kitchen became their sanctuary. Sarah taught Michael how to chop vegetables. "Not so fast, you'll lose a finger." The sesh showed him how to measure ingredients. "That's too much salt." And guided his hands as he learned to knead dough. "You have to be gentle but firm, like this." Danny wandered in, drawn by the sounds and smells, and soon joined them. Sarah put him in charge of stirring, his little face serious with concentration as he perched on a stool. The fear didn't disappear, but it receded as they worked together. Sarah made her grandmother's secret recipe chicken, teaching Michael and Danny the special spice blend. They prepared fresh bread, roasted vegetables, and a chocolate cake that Danny insisted on decorating himself. By the time they sat down to dinner, the table was loaded with food, and the kitchen was a disaster zone of flour and dirty dishes. But Sarah was smiling again, and Michael found himself relaxing as they passed dishes around. "This is the best dinner ever," Danny announced, his face smeared with chocolate frosting. He looked at Michael with bright eyes. "Can we do this every night? Can you be my dad forever?" Sarah choked on her water. "Danny, we can't just—" But Michael had gone very still, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. Something warm and overwhelming was rising in his chest, making his vision blur. He set his fork down carefully, aware of a wetness on his cheeks. "Michael?" Sarah's voice was soft, concerned. "Are you okay?" He tried to speak, but couldn't find words. All his life, he'd built walls to keep people out, convinced that loneliness was safer than risking his heart. But this little boy had crashed through those walls without even trying. And now— "I'm sorry," Danny said in a small voice, misunderstanding Michael's tears. "I didn't mean to make you sad." Michael shook his head quickly, finding his voice. "You didn't make me sad, Danny. Not at all. I'm just very happy." "Really?" Danny's face lit up. "So you will be my dad?" Sarah started to intervene, but Michael met her eyes across the table. In that moment, looking at her and Danny, he saw everything he'd never dared to want: a family, love, belonging. The thought should have terrified him, but instead, it filled him with a certainty he'd never known. He wiped his eyes, smiling at Danny. "That's something your mom and I would need to talk about. But I want you to know that you and your mom mean very much to me." Danny seemed satisfied with this answer, returning to his cake with enthusiasm. Under the table, Sarah's foot touched Michael's briefly, a small gesture of understanding and something more. As they finished dinner, Michael watched Sarah laughing at Danny's chocolate-covered face and made a decision. Tonight, after Danny was in bed, he would tell Sarah everything: how she'd brought light into his dark mansion, how her strength amazed him, how Danny's innocent love had changed his heart. He would tell her that he wanted to be more than just their protector. He would tell her that, for the first time in his life, he was ready to risk everything for love. The morning sun cast long shadows across Michael's bedroom as he stood before his mirror, adjusting his tie for the fourth time. His hands trembled slightly, something that hadn't happened since his first major business presentation 20 years ago. But this was different. This wasn't about money or power. This was about his heart. He had spent hours rehearsing what to say, but every practiced speech felt hollow compared to the depth of his feelings. Running his fingers through his perfectly combed hair, he let out a frustrated sigh. The mirror reflected back a man he barely recognized anymore. Someone with hope in his eyes instead of cold calculation. Downstairs, he found Sarah in the kitchen, humming while she packed Danny's lunch for the day. The boy was still upstairs getting dressed. Michael cleared his throat. "Sarah, would you take a walk with me in the gardens this morning, after Danny leaves for his studies with the tutor?" She looked up, surprised by the formality in his voice. "Of course, Michael. Is everything okay?" "Yes. Just something I'd like to discuss." The gardens were Michael's pride, though he rarely visited them himself. Perfectly manicured hedges created intimate pathways between blooming flowers and ornate fountains. As they walked, Sarah's hand brushed against a rose bush. "These are beautiful," she said softly. "I've never seen such perfect roses." Michael stopped walking, his heart thundering in his chest. "Sarah, I need to tell you something." She turned to face him, concern crossing her features. The morning light caught in her hair, making it glow like honey. Michael forced himself to maintain eye contact, though every instinct screamed at him to retreat to his safe, isolated world. I didn't expect." He ran a hand through his hair again, destroying its careful arrangement. "When you arrived that night, I thought you would disrupt everything. And you did, but not in the way I feared." Sarah remained silent, her eyes wide and attentive. "You and Danny. You've brought something into my life I didn't know I was missing. Warmth, laughter, purpose beyond just accumulating wealth." Michael's voice grew stronger as he continued. "I've fallen in love with both of you. With the way Danny looks at the world with such wonder. With your strength and kindness. With the way you've turned this empty house into a home." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. She took a step closer, then stopped herself. "Michael," she whispered, "I feel the same way. You've given us more than just protection. You've given us hope, stability, love." Her voice cracked. "But my past, what I'm running from, it could destroy everything you've built. Your reputation, your business. I don't care about any of that." Michael started to say, reaching for her hand. The harsh sound of tires on gravel cut through the morning peace. They both turned toward the front gates, where a black sports utility vehicle had pulled up. 3 men stepped out, their stances aggressive even from a distance. "Sarah Lopez," one of them shouted. "We know you're in there. Return what you stole, and maybe we can work something out." The color drained from Sarah's face. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." Michael's security team was already moving toward the gates, but he didn't wait to see their response. He grabbed Sarah's hand and pulled her toward the house. "Danny," she gasped. "We need to get Danny." They found the boy in the library with his tutor, blissfully unaware of the situation. Michael's voice was calm but firm. "Danny, go with your mother to the safe room we practiced. Remember where it is?" Danny nodded, his eyes growing wide with understanding. Sarah clutched him close as Michael led them to a hidden panel in his study. Once they were secure inside, he called the police, his voice clipped and authoritative as he reported armed trespassers. Through the security cameras, he watched the men argue with his security team. They were well-dressed, professional-looking, not the typical thugs he had expected. One of them held up what appeared to be legal documents. "Tell Sarah we know about the files," one of them called out. "Tell her this doesn't end until we get them back." The police arrived within minutes, their sirens sending the men back to their vehicle. As they drove away, one of them pointed directly at the security camera, a clear message that this wasn't over. Michael stood in his study, his earlier warmth replaced by a familiar cold dread. Files? What files? Sarah had told him about running from an abusive husband, but nothing about stolen documents. The old walls around his heart began to rebuild themselves, brick by brick. He opened the safe room to find Sarah holding Danny, both of them pale but composed. When she saw his expression, something broke in her eyes. "Michael, please, I can explain," she began. He held up a hand, his business mask firmly in place. "Were you ever going to tell me about these files they want?" Sarah swallowed hard. "It's complicated." Complicated? The word came out sharper than he intended. "I offered you protection. I opened my home, my heart, and you're still keeping secrets?" Danny looked between them, his small face confused and worried. "Mom? Michael? Are the bad guys gone?" The innocence in Danny's voice cut through Michael's anger like a knife, but the damage was done. His old wounds, abandonment, betrayal, the lesson that love always came with hidden costs, roared back to life. The morning's confession felt like a distant dream, replaced by the harsh reality that trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. The study felt smaller that night, its wood-paneled walls closing in as Michael paced before the fireplace. Sarah sat rigid in one of the leather armchairs, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The flames cast dancing shadows across their faces, but neither found comfort in its warmth. "You need to tell me everything," Michael said, his voice carrying an edge she hadn't heard before. "Those men weren't just making idle threats. They specifically mentioned something you took." Sarah's shoulders tensed. "I didn't steal anything material, Michael. The only thing I took was our freedom, mine and Danny's." "Then why would they phrase it that way?" He stopped pacing, fixing her with a hard stare. "Why would they say you need to return what you stole?" "Because men like my ex-husband see wives and children as possessions." Sarah's voice cracked with emotion. "In his mind, I stole his property when I left. That's all we ever were to him. Things to own and control." Michael ran his fingers through his hair in frustration. "But there has to be more. Professional thugs don't chase someone across states just for leaving a marriage. You don't understand what kind of man he is." Sarah stood up, her eyes glistening. "He's obsessed with control. The fact that I dared to leave, that I took Danny away from him, it's an insult he can't let go. His pride won't allow it." "I want to believe you," Michael said, his tone softening slightly. "But I've spent my entire life building walls to protect myself from exactly this kind of situation. People who aren't completely honest, who bring danger to my door." "I told you everything important from the beginning," Sarah interrupted, wrapping her arms around herself. "I told you about the abuse, about his criminal connections. I warned you that he was dangerous. But did you really tell me everything?" Michael's voice grew quiet. "Dangerous. Because every day seems to bring new revelations, new threats. First it was letters, then surveillance photos, now armed men at my gate." Sarah sank back into the chair, suddenly looking very tired. "What do you want me to say, Michael? That I'm sorry for putting you in danger?" "I am. That I should have never accepted your help? Maybe you're right." She looked up at him, tears now flowing freely. "But I won't apologize for trying to give my son a better life." The grandfather clock in the corner ticked heavily, marking each second of silence between them. Michael stood by the fireplace, his silhouette dark against the flames, wrestling with his own demons. "I open my heart to you today," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you know how terrifying that was for me? How many years of barriers I had to break down?" "I know," Sarah replied softly. "And I meant what I said in the garden. My feelings for you are real, but not real enough to trust me with the whole truth." Sarah stood again, this time moving toward him. "Michael, please. I'm trusting you with our lives. What more do you want?" He stepped back from her approach, and the hurt in her eyes was immediate and deep. "I want to know that I'm not being used. That this isn't some elaborate scheme to get my money or protection. That I haven't been a fool for believing in this." He gestured between them. "How dare you?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling with anger and pain. "How dare you reduce what we've shared to something so cynical? Danny adores you." She caught herself, shaking her head. "But you're right about one thing. We can't stay here." Michael's head snapped up. "What?" "I won't burden you with our problems anymore. You've been more than generous, but I can see now that this was a mistake." She moved toward the door. "We'll be gone by morning." "Sarah, wait." Michael reached for her, but she was already walking away, her footsteps echoing down the hallway. He stood alone in the study, the fire dying behind him, as the sound of her footsteps faded away. His chest felt hollow, like something vital had been torn out. Throughout the night, he sat in his darkened bedroom, listening to the quiet sounds of packing from the guest wing. Every soft thump, every muffled voice felt like another nail in the coffin of his dreams of family. As dawn broke over the hills, Michael stood at his bedroom window, watching as Sarah and Danny emerged from the front door. They carried only what they'd brought with them, plus a small bag of necessities. Danny looked up at the mansion, his young face confused and sad, clearly searching for Michael. Sarah took her son's hand, and together they began the long walk down the curved driveway. Michael pressed his hand against the cold glass, paralyzed by the warring impulses in his heart. Part of him screamed to run after them, to fix this, to trust in the warmth and love they'd brought into his life. But the other part, the scared little boy who'd learned early that love meant betrayal, kept him rooted in place. He watched until they disappeared through the gates, becoming small figures on the road beyond. The morning sun painted the sky in brilliant colors, but Michael saw none of it. He turned away from the window, facing his vast, empty bedroom. The silence that had once been his comfort now felt like a physical weight pressing down on him. He walked through the mansion's halls, each step echoing in the stillness. Every corner held a memory. Danny's laughter as they played chess, Sarah's humming in the kitchen, the warmth of family dinners at the long table. Standing in the center of his great room, Michael realized with crushing clarity that his sanctuary had become a mausoleum once again. The walls that had witnessed such joy over the past days now seemed to mock him with their emptiness. Every laugh, every warm moment, every dream of family, all gone, scattered like autumn leaves in a cruel wind. The grandfather clock struck 7, its chimes reverberating through the silent halls. Michael stood alone, surrounded by all his wealth and accomplishments, feeling poorer than he'd ever been in his life. The grandfather clock's chimes echoed through the empty halls, marking 48 hours since Sarah and Danny had walked away. Michael sat at his massive dining table, pushing eggs around his plate with mechanical movements. The staff had returned to their old routines, serving him in silence, their footsteps hesitant, as if walking through a mausoleum rather than a home. He couldn't shake the feeling that the mansion's very walls were mocking him. Every corner held memories now. The kitchen where Sarah's cooking had filled the air with warmth. The living room where Danny's laughter had bounced off the vaulted ceilings. Even his sanctuary, the library, had betrayed him. Michael pushed open the heavy oak doors, and his breath caught in his throat. Danny's toys still lay scattered across the Persian rug. Tiny cars frozen mid-race. A partially completed puzzle showing glimpses of a cartoon dinosaur. He knelt down, picking up a small red fire truck. Danny had been so proud when he'd made the siren sounds, racing it along the bookshelf bases, while Michael pretended to read financial reports. The toy felt impossibly heavy in his hand. He set it back down carefully, exactly where it had been, as if disturbing it might erase the memory completely. "Sir?" His butler stood in the doorway, concern etched on his weathered face. "Would you like me to have these cleaned up?" "No." Michael's voice was hoarse from disuse. "Leave them." The silence pressed in again as the butler withdrew. Michael paced the length of his home office, unable to focus on work. The sky outside darkened to evening, then night, but sleep eluded him. Images of Sarah and Danny sleeping in some cramped motel room, or worse, their car, tormented him. At 3 a.m, he made his decision. Grabbing his keys, he drove his least conspicuous car into the city. The streets were eerily empty, his headlights cutting through a light fog that had settled over everything. The first shelter he visited was closing up for the night. The tired-looking woman at the desk shook her head when he described Sarah and Danny. "Haven't seen anyone matching that description. Try St. Mary's on 4th Street. They take families." St. Mary's led to another dead end, and another. Each no felt like a physical blow. Michael visited every budget motel along the highway, showing Sarah's picture on his phone. Some clerks recognized the desperation in his eyes and took pity, checking their records carefully. Others just shrugged, barely glancing at the image. Hours passed. The sun rose and set again. Michael's perfectly pressed suit grew wrinkled, his usual pristine appearance deteriorating as exhaustion set in. He couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered except finding them. He was about to give up when he spotted them. The small church food pantry was closing for the night, its volunteers loading up the last boxes of donations. Sarah emerged from the heavy wooden doors, one hand clutching a paper bag of groceries, the other firmly holding Danny's small fingers. Even in the harsh fluorescent light of the street lamp, she carried herself with dignity. Michael's heart clenched. She looked tired, bone-tired, but her chin was lifted, her shoulders straight. Danny walked close to her side, his free hand clutching his beloved toy truck. They hadn't seen Michael yet, sitting in his parked car across the street. He watched as they walked to an ancient station wagon parked at the curb. Sarah carefully placed the groceries in the back seat, then helped Danny climb in. The car's paint was faded, its muffler hanging slightly low, but it represented freedom to her. Freedom from abuse, from fear, from depending on anyone else, including him. Through the windshield, he could see Danny settling into his seat, Sarah buckling him in with gentle movements. The boy's mouth was moving, probably asking one of his endless questions. Sarah smiled down at him, though even from this distance, Michael could see the strain around her eyes. A street light flickered overhead, casting alternating shadows and light across the scene. The night was growing colder, and Sarah pulled her thin jacket tighter around herself, before walking around to the driver's side. Michael's fingers tightened on his steering wheel as he watched them prepare to drive away, probably to sleep in that car, or some cramped motel room if they were lucky. He had failed them. His fear, his inability to trust, had driven away the only people who had made his mansion feel like a home. Danny's innocent questions and Sarah's warm laughter had filled spaces he hadn't even known were empty. Now the silence in those spaces felt deafening. Sarah started the car, the engine coughing to life reluctantly. Through the station wagon's windows, Michael could see Danny clutching his toy truck, his small face turned toward the church as they pulled away from the curb. The taillights disappeared around a corner, leaving Michael alone in the gathering darkness. He sat there for a long time, the engine idling, watching the spot where they had vanished. The food pantry's lights went out one by one as the volunteers left. Soon the street was deserted except for his car, a solitary testament to his indecision. The red fire truck in his library flashed through his mind, waiting exactly where Danny had left it, hoping for one more race across the carpet. His mansion waited too, its rooms echoing with memories of laughter and life that had briefly transformed it from a showcase into a home. Michael realized he was gripping his steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had turned white. He forced himself to relax his fingers, one by one, as the weight of his choices settled over him like a heavy blanket. Michael's hands trembled on the steering wheel. He couldn't let them walk away into the darkness, not like this. Taking a deep breath, he stepped out of his car, his expensive shoes crunching on loose gravel as he followed their path around the corner. The churchyard lay bathed in moonlight, old headstones casting long shadows across patchy grass. Sarah and Danny had stopped to rest on a wooden bench near the church's side entrance. Danny's head rested against his mother's arm, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. "Sarah," Michael called softly, his voice carrying in the night air. She startled, instinctively pulling Danny closer. When she recognized Michael, her expression shifted from fear to something more complex. Pain, longing, and resignation, all mixed together. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice tight. "Please, just go." Michael took a step forward. "I can't. These past 2 days have been torture. The mansion feels like a tomb without you both there. It's better this way," Sarah insisted, though her voice wavered. "You deserve someone without all this baggage, someone who won't bring danger to your doorstep, someone whole." Danny stirred, blinking sleepily. "Michael," he mumbled, hope creeping into his tired voice. The sound of the boy's voice broke something in Michael. His legs gave way, and he fell to his knees on the damp grass, not caring about his $1,000 suit or what anyone might think of a billionaire kneeling in a humble churchyard. "Please listen to me," he pleaded, his carefully constructed walls crumbling completely. "All my wealth, all my possessions, they've given me nothing but empty rooms and hollow victories. But you," his voice cracked, "you and Danny gave me everything. You showed me what it means to laugh, to care, to feel like I belong somewhere. For the first time in my life, I understood what having a family could be." Sarah's eyes glistened with tears. "Michael, I was a coward," he continued, the words pouring out. "I let my fear of being hurt make me doubt you. But I'd rather risk everything, my reputation, my safety, all of it, than go back to that empty life without you both." Danny wiggled free from his mother's grasp and ran to Michael, throwing his small arms around his neck. "I missed you," he whispered. Michael hugged him back fiercely, meeting Sarah's eyes over the boy's shoulder. He could see her resolve wavering, the walls she'd built starting to crack. But before she could respond, harsh headlights suddenly flooded the churchyard. 3 black SUVs pulled up, their engines growling in the quiet night. Car doors slammed, and heavy footsteps approached. "Well, isn't this touching?" A rough voice cut through the darkness. Sarah's ex-husband emerged from the shadows, flanked by 4 burly men, his face twisted into an ugly sneer. "The virgin billionaire, on his knees in the dirt, and my wife, playing house with the rich man." Michael rose slowly, positioning himself in front of Sarah and Danny. "She's not your wife anymore," he said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "And you're not welcome here." The ex-husband laughed, a cruel sound that echoed off the church walls. "You don't get to decide that, money man. Sarah took something that belongs to me when she ran, and I'm here to collect." He cracked his knuckles menacingly. "Both what she stole and what she owes me." "I didn't steal anything," Sarah cried out. "I only took what was mine, my freedom, my son's safety." "Lying bitch," her ex snarled, taking a step forward. Michael held his ground. "Don't come any closer," he warned, reaching slowly into his pocket where his phone was already connected to emergency services, recording everything. The first punch came fast, catching Michael in the jaw. He staggered but didn't fall, years of boxing training kicking in. He blocked the second blow and landed one of his own, sending Sarah's ex stumbling backward. The other men surged forward. Michael fought desperately, using every skill he had to keep them away from Sarah and Danny. A fist caught him in the ribs, another split his lip, but he refused to yield. Sarah pulled Danny behind a stone monument, shielding him with her body. Just when Michael's strength was failing, police sirens pierced the night. Red and blue lights flooded the churchyard as 3 patrol cars screeched to a halt. Officers poured out, weapons drawn. "Police! Everyone on the ground, now!" Sarah's ex and his men tried to run but were quickly surrounded. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut filled the air as officers took control of the scene. Sarah burst out from behind the monument. Danny clutched tight against her. She ran to Michael, who was leaning heavily against a nearby headstone, his face bloody but his eyes fierce with protection. "Oh God, Michael," she sobbed, touching his bruised face with trembling fingers. "You're hurt." He caught her hand, pressing it to his cheek, despite the pain. "I'm okay," he assured her. "You're safe. Now, both of you are safe." Danny wrapped his arms around both their legs, creating a three-way embrace as Sarah's ex was led away in handcuffs, spitting threats that no one heeded. Sarah buried her face in Michael's chest, her tears soaking through his torn shirt. Years of fear and running finally broke free as she cried, feeling truly secure for the first time in so long. Michael's arms encircled both her and Danny, holding them close as police lights continued to flash across the churchyard. "I'm so sorry," Sarah whispered against his chest. "I'm sorry I ran. I was just so scared of bringing more pain into your life." "Never apologize for protecting yourself and Danny," Michael murmured into her hair. "But please, don't run from me again. Let me help you fight whatever comes next. Let me be part of your family." Danny looked up at them both, his small face serious. "Can we go home now?" he asked simply. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the mansion's driveway as Michael's car pulled up to the front steps. His hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel as he parked, his mind replaying the events of the previous night. The fight, the arrests, the way Sarah had clung to him as if he were her anchor in a storm. He found Sarah and Danny waiting outside the small motel where they'd stayed after giving their statements to the police. Danny's face lit up when he saw Michael's car, and he tugged on his mother's sleeve with excitement. "Sarah," Michael called softly as he stepped out of the car. His split lip was still tender, and a bruise darkened his jaw, but his eyes shone with determination. "I want you both to come home." Sarah shifted uncertainly, her hand tightening on Danny's shoulder. "Michael, we can't keep imposing." "Not as guests," he interrupted, taking a step closer. "As family." Danny bounced on his toes. "Really? We can stay forever?" Michael knelt down to Danny's level, ignoring the twinge in his ribs. "Yes, buddy, forever, if that's what you and your mom want." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Michael, are you sure? After everything that happened?" "I've never been more sure of anything." He stood, closing the distance between them. "What I said last night wasn't just because of the moment. Every word was true. My life was empty before you both came into it." A warm breeze rustled through the trees, carrying the sweet scent of nearby flowering bushes. Michael reached for Sarah's hand, his touch gentle. "I know you're worried about my reputation, about what people will say. But I don't care about any of that. I care about you, about Danny, about the family we could be." Danny tugged at Michael's sleeve. "Can I have my own room, with space for all my toys?" Michael laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "Actually, I have something better in mind. I've already called contractors. We're going to turn the east wing into a proper playroom, with built-in shelves for your books and toys, a craft area, maybe even a small climbing wall." Sarah's eyes widened. "Michael, that's too much." "And," he continued, squeezing her hand, "the library's connected study would be perfect for your teaching work. I remember you mentioning you'd always wanted to tutor children who struggle with reading." Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks. "You remembered that?" "I remember everything you've told me." His voice softened. "Every story, every dream, every hope. I want to help make them real." Danny wrapped his arms around Michael's legs. "Does this mean you're going to be my dad now?" Michael's heart swelled as he ruffled Danny's hair. "If that's something you'd want, buddy, we'll take things one day at a time." Sarah wiped her eyes, a small smile finally breaking through her tears. "You really want this?" "Us? More than anything." Michael gestured to his car. "Come home. Let me show you what I have planned." The drive back to the mansion was filled with Danny's excited chatter about his future playroom. Michael caught Sarah's eye in the rearview mirror several times, each glance carrying more warmth than the last. As they walked through the mansion's front doors, Michael led them to the east wing. Contractors had already arrived, their trucks parked outside. Blueprint rolls covered a temporary table in the hallway. "See here," Michael pointed to the drawings. The whole space will be bright and open. Windows along this wall, built-in seating by the bay window for reading. Sarah traced the lines with her finger, her expression softening as she imagined the possibilities. It's beautiful. They moved through the house, Michael describing his vision for each space. The formal dining room would become more welcoming, the stark white walls warmed with family photos. The kitchen would be renovated to accommodate Sarah's love of cooking together. In the garden, surrounded by blooming roses and the gentle splash of the fountain, Michael turned to Sarah. Danny had run ahead to inspect a butterfly, giving them a moment alone. I know this is fast, Michael said softly, and if you need time, I understand. But I've spent 40 years being careful, being distant. I don't want to waste another day pretending I'm not falling in love with you. Sarah's breath caught. She stepped closer, her hand reaching up to touch his bruised jaw gently. You fought for us last night. I'd fight for you every day if I had to. His voice was barely a whisper now. But I'd rather spend those days making you happy instead. The space between them disappeared slowly, like the last moments of sunset. When their lips met, it was soft, tentative. A first kiss filled with promise rather than demand. Sarah's hands slid to his shoulders as Michael's arms wrapped around her waist, holding her as if she were precious. When they parted, Michael pressed his forehead to hers. I've never felt like this before. It's terrifying and wonderful all at once. I know, Sarah whispered back. Me too. Danny's delighted shout broke the moment as he discovered a family of rabbits near the garden wall. They turned to watch him, Michael's arm still around Sarah's waist. I never knew what I was missing, Michael admitted. All these years in this huge house, I thought I was protecting myself, but I was just hiding from life itself. The sound of Danny's laughter, the smell of your cooking, the way you both fill every room with light, it's like, I'm finally alive. Sarah leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. We'll figure it out together, she promised. Day by day. As the sun climbed higher, warming the garden around them, contractors began their work inside. The sounds of renovation echoed through the mansion, not disrupting the peace, but adding to it. Each bang of a hammer, each scrape of a saw, marked another step toward transformation. The mansion was changing, just as Michael was. Empty spaces being filled, cold corners warming, silence giving way to the beautiful chaos of family life. And in the garden, wrapped in each other's arms, while Danny chased butterflies, Michael and Sarah shared soft smiles, knowing this was just the beginning. The summer breeze drifted through the newly installed garden windows of the mansion, carrying the scent of blooming roses and fresh-cut grass. Inside, the once sterile halls now echoed with the sounds of life, footsteps, laughter, and the occasional crash of Danny's toy cars racing down the corridor. Michael sat at his desk, reviewing blueprints for a new building project. But unlike the cold office towers and luxury developments that had built his fortune, this one made his heart swell with purpose. The Sarah Lopez Community Shelter would stand as a beacon of hope for those seeking refuge, just as Sarah and Danny had that stormy night months ago. What do you think about adding a children's playroom here? He asked Sarah, who was curled up on the leather sofa nearby. Textbooks spread around her as she studied for her teaching certification. She looked up, pushing her reading glasses onto her head. That would be perfect. I remember how hard it was keeping Danny occupied when we were. Her voice trailed off, but Michael understood. Those dark days of running and hiding were behind them now. Then it's settled, he said, making a note on the plans. We'll make it bright, welcoming. A place where kids can feel safe while their parents get back on their feet. Sarah set aside her textbook and crossed the room to stand behind him, wrapping her arms around his shoulders. You're amazing, you know that. Michael leaned back into her embrace, still marveling at how natural such affection had become. I'm just trying to give back. That night you came to my gate. You gave me so much more than I gave you. Their quiet moment was interrupted by the thundering of small feet. Danny burst into the study, wearing his school backpack like a superhero cape. Mom, Dad, we're gonna be late for the science fair. Michael's heart skipped at the word Dad, a title Danny had started using naturally over the past months, each time filling Michael with a joy he never knew possible. He glanced at his watch and jumped up. Can't have that, buddy. Your volcano awaits." The drive to Danny's elementary school was filled with excited chatter about papier-mâché mountains and red food coloring for lava. Michael caught Sarah's eye in the rearview mirror, sharing a silent smile at their son's enthusiasm. Their son, the thought still amazed him. The school gymnasium buzzed with activity, packed with proud parents and nervous students standing beside their projects. Danny led them to his display, carefully arranged on a folding table decorated with construction paper flames. "And here's where the baking soda goes," Danny explained to a cluster of classmates, his voice confident as he demonstrated his volcano's eruption mechanism. "My dad helped me get the measurements exactly right." Michael felt his throat tighten at those words. He remembered spending evenings in the kitchen with Danny, measuring ingredients, testing different combinations until they achieved the perfect lava flow. Simple moments that meant everything. Mr. and Mrs. Harrington, a teacher, approached, smiling warmly. Neither Michael nor Sarah corrected her assumption. "Danny's project is quite impressive. He's been telling everyone how his dad is a mathematical genius who helped him calculate the precise chemical ratios." Michael choked up, unable to speak for a moment. Sarah squeezed his hand, understanding the depth of emotion behind his silence. This was so far from his old life of boardrooms and billion-dollar deals, yet it felt infinitely more valuable. Later that evening, after Danny had gone to bed, but not before Michael read 2 chapters of Harry Potter, their nightly ritual, Sarah found Michael standing in the doorway of Danny's room, watching the boys sleep. "He's so proud to call you his dad," she whispered, joining him in the doorway. Michael wiped at his eyes. "I never knew. I spent so many years chasing success, thinking that was what would make me happy. But this, being someone's father, being part of a family, it's everything." They walked hand in hand to their bedroom, passing walls now adorned with family photos and Danny's artwork. The mansion had transformed just as much as its owner, warming from a showcase of wealth into a true home. Sarah paused by a framed newspaper article announcing the groundbreaking of the community shelter. "You've changed so many lives, Michael, not just ours." He pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "You changed mine first. The virgin billionaire died the night you knocked on my gate. Now I'm just dad, and that title means more than any other I've ever held." Sarah laughed softly. "Well, Just Dad has a parent-teacher conference tomorrow at 10 o'clock. So we should probably get some sleep." Michael grinned, following her into their room. As they settled into bed, he marveled at how naturally this life had come to feel. His calendar was now filled with school events, soccer practices, and family dinners instead of just business meetings. His desk held crayon drawings, alongside financial reports. Every morning, he woke to the sounds of Danny getting ready for school, Sarah brewing coffee in the kitchen, and the 100 other small noises that meant he was no longer alone. The silence that had once defined his existence was replaced by the beautiful chaos of family life. As he drifted off to sleep, Michael thought about the community shelter rising from its foundations across town. Soon it would offer other families the same chance at a new beginning that Sarah and Danny had found at his gate that stormy night. The thought filled him with a deep sense of purpose, not as a billionaire or businessman, but as a husband, a father, and a man who had finally learned the true meaning of success. The mansion that had once echoed with emptiness now overflowed with love, laughter, and the countless small moments that made up a family's life together. Michael Harrington, the man who had everything but lived with nothing, had finally found what money could never buy: the joy of being someone's dad. The small church glowed with warmth on a perfect autumn morning. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across wooden pews adorned with simple white ribbons and wildflowers. This wasn't the grand society wedding people might have expected from Michael Harrington, billionaire. Instead, it was intimate and heartfelt, filled with the people who had become their true family. The mansion staff, who had watched their employer transform from a solitary figure into a loving father, occupied the front rows. Mrs. Chen, the housekeeper, dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Next to her sat Tom, the groundskeeper who had taught Danny how to plant sunflowers. Neighbors who had witnessed their Story unfold filled other pews, along with Sarah's fellow teaching students and the volunteers from the new shelter. Michael stood at the altar, his usually perfect posture betraying a nervous energy. His designer suit was flawless, but his eyes kept darting to the church entrance, waiting. The pastor, a kind-faced man who had counseled them through their engagement, gave him a reassuring smile. The soft notes of a piano filled the chapel. Everyone turned as Danny appeared in his little tuxedo, carefully carrying a silk pillow with 2 golden rings. His face beamed with importance as he concentrated on each step, just as they'd practiced. Michael's heart swelled at the sight of his soon-to-be official son. Then Sarah appeared in the doorway, and Michael forgot how to breathe. She wore a simple ivory dress that caught the light like morning frost. Her dark hair was crowned with tiny white flowers, and her eyes shone with joy as she began her walk down the aisle. She carried a bouquet of wildflowers, the same kind that now brightened the mansion's once sterile halls. Michael remembered the first time he saw her, drenched and desperate at his gate. Now she moved toward him with confidence and love, her smile holding all the warmth that had melted his frozen heart. Danny bounced excitedly at the altar, barely containing himself as Sarah approached. When she reached them, he wrapped his arms around both their legs in an impromptu hug that made the congregation chuckle softly. "Dearly beloved," the pastor began, his voice gentle but carrying to every corner of the church. "We are gathered here today to witness not just the union of 2 hearts, but the blessing of a family brought together by God's grace." Michael's hands trembled slightly as he took Sarah's in his. The pastor spoke of love's patience, its kindness, its ability to transform lives. But Michael could hardly focus on the words, lost in Sarah's eyes and the miracle of this moment. When it came time for the vows, Michael's voice grew strong and clear, though thick with emotion. "Sarah," he began, "I spent years building walls around my heart, thinking I was protecting myself. But you and Danny showed me that real strength comes from letting love in. I promise to cherish you both, to protect our family, and to thank God every day for the storm that brought you to my door." Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks as she spoke her vows. "Michael, you offered us shelter when we had nowhere else to go. But you gave us so much more. You gave us a home, hope, and your heart. I promise to love you, support you, and remind you every day that you are not just Danny's father, but my soul's perfect match." Danny presented the rings with solemn ceremony, though he couldn't suppress his proud grin. As Michael slipped the band onto Sarah's finger, his own hand steady now, he marveled at how this simple circle of gold meant more than all his wealth ever had. "By the power vested in me," the pastor proclaimed, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Michael drew Sarah close, their first kiss as married couple, sweet and pure. Danny clapped loudest of all, jumping up and down until Sarah and Michael both reached to pull him into their embrace. The reception was held in the mansion's garden, now in full autumn glory. Tables dotted the lawn, decorated with candles and more wildflowers. Staff members had outdone themselves preparing a feast that filled the air with delicious aroma. Children from the neighborhood played tag between the tables, while adults chatted and laughed. Music drifted from a small band playing soft jazz. Michael held Sarah close as they swayed to their first dance, her head resting against his chest. "I never thought I'd have this," he whispered into her hair. "Have what?" she asked, looking up at him. "Everything," he answered simply. "A wife who sees past all my walls, a son who taught me how to play again, a home filled with laughter instead of echoes." Danny cut in on their dance, insisting on showing them a new move he'd learned. Soon, other couples joined them on the makeshift dance floor, the celebration flowing as naturally as the golden afternoon light. As evening approached, lanterns twinkled to life in the garden trees. The music switched to hymns, Sarah's favorite, and voices raised in joyful praise. The mansion's windows glowed warmly, no longer a cold fortress but a beacon of welcome. Michael stood slightly apart, watching Sarah teach Danny a clumsy waltz, their laughter carrying across the garden. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, a divine blessing on this perfect day. He closed his eyes briefly, offering a silent prayer of gratitude for the storm that had changed everything. "Ready to cut the cake?" Sarah called, breaking into his thoughts. She held out her hand, Danny bouncing beside her. Michael joined them, his family, his heart complete at last. Together, they cut the first slice of wedding cake, Danny helping with the knife, all three hands joined together. Just like that first night at his gate, but now transformed. No longer strangers seeking shelter, but a family bound by love, faith, and the grace of new beginnings. Thanks for spending a moment here with me. If this story touched you, let's keep this connection going. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.